Hello, this is Richard Lund. I'm reporting from Los Angeles. I have some news that I've observed coming from Daniel Griffin, who gave a report to Vincent Racaniello on the program This Week in Virology, number 595. This past, it was the 27th of March in 2020. So I'd like to dedicate this program, in fact, to Daniel Griffin, a hardworking physician, and in appreciation of all the healthcare staff who are treating people with COVID-19, who are exposing their lives and putting their lives at risk as they continue to help those who are suffering. And, just really admire them. And they are our true soldiers, among others. I was reminded even today that the people at the grocery checkout are also part of their front line in defending our society, our culture, our people from this disease. So let's get on with our story. But first, reminding you I'm on a journey to live a healthy 100 years, and I'd like you to come along with me, especially today, because of what I'll be talking about. I want to remind you that this is not medical advice. I am not a doctor. We really, if we're sick, get good, competent advice. And I often say, maybe you can find a doctor who speaks herbal medicine. But this presentation is for education and perhaps to help even those who are in other places who might be treating patients to get a little bit of insight on what Daniel Griffin said. So we'll begin. He gave his field report from a parking lot. I'll explain that in a minute. One of the things that really stood out, he was talking regarding NLR, and in this particular case, it has a meaning. I'll explain it in a little bit. But it said people with less than 3 as a score, as a ratio, tend to do super well. People above 6, you worry about. And people in the 10 to 20 range, that's your ICU, intensive care unit, potentially needing to be on a ventilator. And above 20 is very serious. So what is NLR? We'll get to that in a minute, but first, let's understand what he is reporting. Daniel Griffin was commenting on his work as a physician treating patients in a hospital in Long Island. He is actively treating COVID-19 patients, so he took a short break to take off his N95 mask to report in. And Vincent Racaniello hosts this discussion show weekly with a team of several scientists, and even has been doing a series of special interviews and putting them up this past week as well. Please see the YouTube show under Vincent Racaniello and also on microbe.tv/TWIV, TWIV. And we'll go on with the report. So at about 1 minute 30 into the program, Daniel gave his update and began with this. He was saying that COVID-19 is a viral illness that presents with the full spectrum of viral illnesses, but there are certain characteristics that can be predictive for a positive PCR. The PCR is a kind of a test that they do, and it's a test that indicates whether or not you have this disease. And I think you have to be ill for probably about 3 days, or at least have a viral infection that goes for about 3 days before you can have a high probability of this showing up correctly. But he also said that in terms of screening, that presence of cough, fever, and shortness of breath also increase positives in the testing. Because we do not have enough tests for everyone who wants one. Yeah, I'm not going to say who said that, but we don't. And so that if you're going to test, you need to screen so that you can catch the ones that are going to be sick and need treatment and need to be isolated and away from other people. I mean, that was his point. That's why he was talking about increasing the positives. There are certain clinical features that help risk stratify. So there we're talking about, or Daniel was talking about, who are the people that are going to have more trouble and maybe need more intervention in treatment. That's their stratification, high risk or low risk. And the first one is shortness of breath. He said about 25% of people who present with this do not have the complaint of shortness of breath, and they are at lower risk. So if you're ill with this and you don't have shortness of breath, at least so far, that's a good thing. So high-risk clinical features are shortness of breath, significant fatigue, headache, and abdominal pain. The clinical features seem to be consistent, and by that he was saying with the reports that they have received from China and other places that these seem to be, a fairly good predictor of how things are going. The first week can be deceptive, he warned, because of mild features. It is on day 7 to 14 of symptom onset that you may see people start to do poorly, he said. So by the days counting there would be, when did you first notice that something was different, something was wrong? And then you count from there to day 7, and then looking forward to the next 7 days. Things could go south pretty quickly, basically, was what he was reporting. Prognostic indicators for poorer outcomes were relayed from China, and that they are being validated, and they are age, which would be under 50, you're at lower risk, and greater than 60 at higher risk. As you can see, I'm higher risk. If I was ill, and of course I'm laughing, but this is no joke, even though this is being reported on April 1st, 2020. So we'll go back to our report here from Daniel. Comorbidities are diabetes, coronary artery disease, asthma, chronic lung disease, renal disease, and active malignancies, and people who are on immune suppressants. So I have a young friend who has had a kidney transplant a couple of times. And when a person receives a transplant, they need to have immunosuppressants because they have foreign tissue in their body, and we don't want their body to reject that. So that's a big deal. Of course, all these other things, coronary artery disease and diabetes, are widespread. Pre-diabetes is widespread. He didn't mention that, but I know that Ford Brewer has been talking about that on his channel. So we need to get serious in America to prepare for the next, pandemic with pneumonia, presentation with pneumonia. We can fix this. I myself have lost 100 pounds, and it made a big change, and it's still something where I could lose more. So we'll go back to our reports. Sorry for the digression. So a clinical outpatient indicator is if they have a reduction in oxygen measured by a pulse oximeter. That is, if it's in the 80s, they are at higher risk. And above 92, they're at lower risk. Now, a pulse oximeter is the kind of thing you stick on your finger. And you have a little thing that you put on your index finger or one of your fingers, and it measures how much oxygen that is in your blood. It's a nice device. I don't own one, but I think you could buy them for maybe around $50, something like that. So we'll go on. So respiratory rate, he said, is helpful. At the rate of less than 20, you're at lower risk, and above 24, you're at higher risk. So respiratory rate would be how many times a minute do I take a breath? And that actually is fairly easy to count. Anybody who's observing another person could tell, even if they were sleeping, how often they breathe. So that's a really important thing to think about, keep in your mind. We're not talking about, like, if I were to run a couple blocks, I would be huffing and puffing. That's not what we're talking about. I'm sure if it's a respiratory rate measured at rest or more or less rest. So we'll go on from there. So he said his favorite, the neutrophil lymphocyte ratio. Now it's the NLR is the way he's talking about it here. And there are other NLRs in discussion these days. So don't feel like that's the only thing. But neutrophil to lymphocyte ratio. He explained that the term means the absolute neutrophil level over the absolute lymphocyte ratio. So when you get your blood work back, if you have the right type of blood test, It's usually a complete blood test with differential. I think it's what they call it. I may be wrong. People with less than 3, here's the key, less than 3. So if you have a certain number of neutrophils and it's less than 3 times higher than the number of lymphocytes, those people, he said, tend to do super well. People above 6, you worry about. The 10 to 20 range, that's your ICU, and potentially needing to be on a ventilator. And above 20 is very serious. He said the Chinese had no survivors at that ratio, but he was hoping that they would have someone, and perhaps that he would report in next week and tell us what happened. He also uses calcitonin, ferritin, C-reactive protein, which is a type of measure of inflammation, and D-dimer. Now, I actually have no idea what D-dimer is, but I'm just reporting what he said. So those are things that help him risk stratify people. That is to see who is at a higher risk. And he said if the patient makes it through the window of seeing the NLR go down and the pulse ox go up, they are seeing discharges. Now, I'll go back to thinking about this. I've been looking at a paper. It was a paper, it's called, it was looking at the inhibition of NF-kappa B-mediated inflammation in severe acute respiratory syndrome, coronavirus-induced mice. Now, we don't have a lot of work, fairly little work, in peer-reviewed papers regarding the present COVID-19 disease and the virus that causes it, which is called SARS-CoV-2. But we do have work that's been done on SARS-CoV-1, and the disease usually was just called SARS. This came up in 2002, 2003, and it's been studied. And I did make mention of this in a previous video, talking about how they were researching, looking at this and looking at the E protein in particular and its effect. E protein is one of the proteins that is made by this particular virus, the RNA virus, SARS-CoV-2. And so the coronaviruses, I think all of them probably have this E protein. And the E protein is kind of a smaller protein, and it has a kind of a ribbon-like, a curly ribbon-like part of it in the middle, which is liking, it favors fats, lipids. So that part is attracted to membranes, which are made out of lipids. And the question is, what does it do? And we've understood so far, the way I've understood it as I'm trying to learn about it, is that it transfers, it's an ion channel through a membrane. So it brings calcium through a membrane. And whether it's coming through the endoplasmic reticulum or the Golgi apparatus, or whether it's actually getting into the mitochondrial membrane itself, and then changing the pH, which would then destroy the mitochondria inside. There's a lot to this, and I'm just trying to learn. So I may be asking more questions than I have answers for anything. But the point of this paper, I'll just hold it up here. Not that you can read it right now, but I will put a link to this in the show notes. Is that what they noticed in the mice? Is they noticed that a high neutrophil ratio versus lymphocytes. And this is what is being reported. Now, up to maybe a few days ago, I was trying to look around to see if anyone was saying that this SARS-CoV-2 was acting like SARS-CoV-1, which is what was used in this mouse study, or a modified version, which would work in the mice, was used in this study. So that's where, I was trying to find out if that was the same. Now, if that's the case, one of the things in the paper that they talked about was that they treated the mice with one of two things. There was caffeic acid, phenylethyl ester, what they think they call it CAPE, C-A-P-E, or the other is parfenolide. Now, parfenolide is a molecule that is in an herb called Feverfew. Now, I'll just hold this up to the camera for a second. Feverfew, I guess that's the level there. So the American Botanical Council publishes a monograph on the feverfew, and there are some other papers on that. So in feverfew is this molecule parthenolide. Now, I've looked it up online. There are places that sell purified parthenolide. Do I want to suggest that anybody buy that because it might help you survive this disease as a purified form? It would be a bad plan. It would be just as bad as the guy in Arizona who took the stuff from the aquarium to try to treat his disease and died. So I'm not advocating people take a purified form of something and make their own medicine out of it, because for all I know, it could kill you, and that would be a bad outcome. So, but one thing that is available for ordinary people, is the herb feverfew, and there probably are some other herbs. I suspect that chrysanthemum, that's used in Chinese medicine, and also magnolia, which is used in Chinese medicine, probably has some of this parthenolide in there. And so how much you actually get is a question I don't know. But at least it would be something that would be safe, because people have used feverfew for a long time, for centuries, I'm sure, and perhaps longer. And it does have some negative side effects. So if you're pregnant, feverfew is something you want to stay away from. I mean, the American Botanical Council rates it a 2B in their risk system. And that means that for people who are pregnant, don't take it. It's not, you do not want to take it. So if you hear anything from me about feverfew, is if you're pregnant or think you're pregnant or might become pregnant, that's not for you. Believe me, it's not for you. And if anyone else wants to, take it, that I'm not recommending it to them. I'm just saying this stuff exists. It probably has some amount of parthenolide in it, and at some point it may be a benefit. It seemed to help the mice, but I don't know. That's just throwing it out there, because I think I need ideas from all quarters to see what we can do to help people survive this disease. I think I'm going to stop there at this point. There's some really other interesting news out there, but and perhaps I'll do a little bit more detail on feverfew in the future and try to explain that. I just want to say again, thank you for taking a look. We're in this together, and we have already had a severe disruption in our society. We had a lot of trouble for a lot of people. Some members of my family are going to have terrible economic disasters, perhaps because of this time. But this is also the time to remember what's important. It's important to remember the family in which you live, the family from which you came, the family that you have given birth to, and those who are coming after you. That we are all connected together. We have a wonderful opportunity to support and bless one another today. I look back on my great-grandfather, Nils Nicolaisen. Now, Nils, I never met. He died long before I was born. In fact, before my father was born. And there was a newspaper report. I met the man who went with him to the doctor in Minneapolis. And Nils lived in northwestern Minnesota. And this man that went with Nils to the doctor in Minneapolis said that the doctor told him basically to go home and get your affairs in order. You've got about 6 weeks to live. I don't know what the disease was, but whatever it was, he went home and he did more or less die on schedule. But one of the things he did before he died was to publish a prayer in the local newspaper. And I have seen that prayer. I don't have a copy of it today, but I've seen the prayer. And he was praying for those who came after him and his family. And as I read that, I realized it included me. It's important for us as we think of our families, to bless those who come after us, and be thankful for those who came before. Imperfect as we all are, I wish you a healthy 100 years. Bye-bye.